What's going on, guys? Welcome to week 5. We're officially coming up on the halfway mark. We're pretty much at the halfway mark now. So I hope you've learnt a lot and I hope you've had fun along the way and hopefully made some progress on creating your own original tracks and sounds. So the theme of the week for week 5 is going to be taking a look at audio effects for the first time. And I'm also going to introduce you to automation. So these two things that I'm going to show you for this week, they're going to unlock quite a bit more possibilities in your productions. They're going to open up new doors and just give you more ways to add a lot more flavor to your tracks. So we're going to take a look at audio effects first. Now, as I mentioned in the first lesson, audio effects are things that will affect the sound. So they're not going to create sound themselves. Those are the instruments and the samples and whatnot. But these guys here, they are going to affect the sound itself. So the audio effects that I'll be covering today, I'm going to go over some fun ones to start with, some effects that you'll be able to use straight away, which will give you the most bang for buck, I guess. And those are going to be reverb, delay, auto pan, and might take a bit of a look at the chorus as well. But the main two will be the reverb and the delay. So let's take a look at reverb first and what it actually does and what it is. I'm going to throw a drum loop into here. Okay, so I've got this little drum loop here at the top in an audio track. So it's just an audio track, so there's no actual instruments down here. And what you can see is because we've already got this set up with an audio file in there, it gives us the option, it just says drop audio effects here. So any effects that you want to use, you just throw them straight into the bottom here onto the track. Or you could even drag them onto the track itself. So it doesn't matter which track I select, I can just drag it anywhere I want. So even though there's no instrument here, I've actually just thrown the reverb on, but you'll see it still says drop instrument here, so it won't actually do anything. What I'll do as well is put a piano on another MIDI track. Okay, so I've just got this grand piano here. You see if you double click a MIDI track, you'll see the instrument. So to put the reverb on, you can either just double click, or if you drag it, just put it after the instrument. You'll see drop audio effects here as well. So the way that it works in Ableton is that you have the thing that's making the sound, so usually the instrument, or if there's an audio file, you won't actually see it, it'll just be here. So that happens first, and then it goes down the chain from left to right. So you can see here next, I've got my reverb. So whatever I add on, it's going to affect the reverb as well, because it goes down the chain from left to right. So let's start with the drum loop. I've got this reverb on it. Now, what is reverb? Essentially, reverb adds space to a sound. So it puts your sound into a space. Now you can think of this like when you clap in a small room, the clap, once you clap, it kind of finishes, especially if you've got furniture in the room and more so if you've got soundproofing on the walls. What happens is you're going to clap, the sound's going to hit the walls and die, so it doesn't bounce back. You're not going to hear it echo out or ring out. Whereas if I'm sure you've gone into a hallway or a big gym, and if you shout or you clap, it reverbs around the whole room and it echoes all the way throughout. And you'll find that it actually takes quite a lot of time, depending on how big the room is, for that sound to finally finish. And I'm sure you've done this, whether it be back in school or wherever. You've gone into a really big room, and even the slightest sound sounds really loud because there's a lot of space in that room, especially if there's hard walls where the sound can reflect off of quite easily. It's going to bounce around a lot more. So with reverb, we can make it sound like our sounds or our instruments are sitting in a space or in a room. This is probably one of the most used audio effects there is, apart from maybe something like the EQ or possibly a filter. But the reverb, as simple as it is, can add quite a lot of complexity to your tracks. And it can really take it to the next level from something that sounds quite dry to giving it that depth and those extra layers. So one thing you'll notice, I dragged it straight in. I'm going to cover this straight away. You'll see global quality is economical. So this uses less CPU. Unless you're on a really old computer or a slow computer, I suggest you set this to high and then right click up the top here on this blue bar and just save it as default preset. So now every time, if I just delete this and drag in another reverb, now you see it's automatically set to high. What this does is slightly alters how the reverb works. And so that high gives you a slightly smoother and nicer sound. It's not terribly noticeable, like if you had one playing at economical and one playing at high, you would really have to listen for the difference, but it does make a difference at the end of the day. So if your computer is old or slow, then, or you're struggling to play the project, then yeah, you can set that to economical or mid. But in this modern day and age, most computers are pretty powerful, so you can afford to set that at high unless you're working with 100+ tracks. So with the reverb, I'm not going to cover every single little option here because the reality is you're not going to use most of it, especially starting out. We will dive in deeper eventually. But what I want to do is actually just get you guys being able to use it instantly without having to worry about tweaking every single little value and what they do. So the first option I'm going to cover is something down here in the bottom right called the dry wet, as you'll see. Now this is something you're going to see on almost every single audio effect. Essentially what this means is if I have it set to 0%, so dry, and I play this, I'm pretty much playing the original sound, and I'll actually turn the reverb on and off and you'll see there's absolutely no difference. By the way, this yellow button up here in the top left is the on and off for all your audio effects and instruments as well. So at 0%, we are playing 100. So at 0%, we are playing just the dry signal. So we're playing just the drums, nothing's actually happening. The more we dial this in, the more we're going to hear the reverb. So if we have this set to 100%, you're not actually going to hear the original sound at all. You're going to hear the original sound that's been through the reverb and come out the reverb, and that's it. You won't actually hear what was originally happening. And you'll notice now when I play it at 100%, that original sound has completely changed. If I turn this on and off, it's just the 100% reverb that we're hearing. So I'll dial this up and down. So at around here, we're getting 50-50. So we're getting half of the original sound, and we're also getting half of what's been processed by the reverb. And you can think of it exactly the same way for every other audio effect. So whenever it's set to 100%, you're only going to hear what the audio effect is doing to the sound. And 0%, you're only going to hear what was happening before that audio effect. Because obviously if you have multiple of these going on at once, let me just grab another reverb here. Let's say I set this first one to 50%. And this next one to 20%. So what's happening now as the sound is playing, it's going through this first reverb, which is outputting the sound at 50% dry and wet. So we're getting half of it with the original sound and half as the processed sound. After that, it's going into this reverb here, and this reverb is adding another 20% of its settings onto the processed sound that was already done through here. So it goes down a chain. So if you stack multiple of these up, it's going to have more and more reverb as it goes. So let's just go back to our one here. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, it will as you play around with the audio effects a little bit more. Okay, so that's dry wet. Now diffuse and reflect I'm not going to go over today because that's real fine-tuning reverb and it's not going to be something you use just starting out. So we'll move over to the left here. I'm going to skip over these two as well. The next most important one would be the decay time. So the most important one would be the dry wet. That's how much reverb you're actually hearing. The next one would be the decay time. So decay time indicates how long it's going to take for the reverb to fall off. So if I set this at 100% over here, and then let's leave it at 1.20 seconds. So I'm just starting and stopping that first hit. So what's happening is the sound is being reverbed, and then it's taking 1.2 seconds to fall off to nothing. Now I'm going to crank this up, let's say something like 10 seconds. Now to put 10 seconds in here, you have to write in 10,000 because it goes by milliseconds. You can see how huge that sound feels now, just by increasing that decay time. Obviously we have a dry wet up as well. I'm just going to let it play out. So now it sounds like someone's playing drums in a cave or a massive, massive room. Whereas before, if we put this down to 1.5 seconds or so, now it sounds like a still pretty big room, but probably a medium-sized room, not quite a gym. Maybe a small gym. But as I dial it up more, it sounds like the sound is getting bigger and the room is getting bigger. Yeah, something like 40 seconds is just getting a little ridiculous. So I don't think I've ever had my reverb up that high. The biggest I'd probably go on is probably even 9 seconds. That's quite a large room, quite a large sounding space. But obviously you can mess with the dry wet as well to affect that. So yeah, decay time is how long the reverb is going to take before it falls off. You can think of this as like making the room bigger and smaller in a way, which is also going to be affected by the size over here. What this does essentially is it affects the color or the tone of the reverb to also give it a feel of different sized rooms. So if we leave this at 2 seconds, I'm just going to leave this at 100%, so we're just hearing the reverb. You can hear as I pulled down that size, it sounds like the room got smaller just by changing. The decay time hasn't changed at all, but the tone of the reverb has changed quite a bit. So you can play around with this as well to achieve the reverb that you're looking for. This value down here, I don't want to get into it too much, but essentially it affects the stereo field of the reverb itself. So if you want to output mono, it would be set to something like 0. And we have a lot more variance once we push it up to 120, but we'll cover this at a later stage. I'm not going to worry about this whole section here or this section just yet. I will talk about the pre-delay now. So the pre-delay is how long until the first reflection hits from the reverb. So by reflection, I mean when you play a sound or clap your hands or whatever, that sound travels, hits the wall and bounces back, which is what reverb is. So what this does is determines how long until that sound is bounced back to you. So if I leave this at 1.8 seconds, sorry, I'll leave this at 50% so you can actually hear the original sound playing and how long it takes for that reverb to happen. You can hear there's quite a delayed effect now. It's like the sound's happening from the source and it's taking a little bit of time to actually bounce back. pull this down as we hear it. So I mean, the default value is going to work for you most of the time unless you're looking for that kind of effect. But that's essentially the reverb. I just want you to focus on what I covered there today for now. You don't really have to mess around with these other ones too much, especially as you're starting out. So just keep in mind, dry wet, the K time, the size, and the pre-delay. Of course, you're more than welcome to play around with the other ones, but it's a lot of fine tuning that you're probably not going to end up using anyway. So yeah, also set your quality to high. Just remember to do that and save it as default unless you are working on an older or slower computer, in which case leaving it economical is fine. As I said, you're not going to hear the difference too much. It's just if you're outputting for a final product, you do want to make sure it's the best it can possibly be. Okay, the next effect I'm going to take a look at is the delay. The same thing, I'm going to drag the delay into here on our drum track so that you're able to hear this a bit easier. I'm just going to make my own drum loop really quickly. Alright, so I've just thrown in a drum kit from Ableton and then just done a kick and a snare on the 1 and 3. Now go back to my audio effects and I'm just going to drag a delay onto the end here. Okay, once again I'll go over quickly the main options, the main settings you're going to use, and then we'll hear what it actually does. So to explain the delay first off, what the delay does is it kind of explains itself, but it basically repeats your sound. I guess that's the easiest way I can explain it for now. So at the moment we just have a kick. Oh, you probably just heard there while it was delayed. We've got one kick and one snare happening. Now if I set this to 4, you can hear we have some extra drums now. So those weren't there in the original sound. We've just got the kick and snare. But with the delay, we've added more layers to this sound now. So that kick is repeating and that snare is repeating as well. Now to go back to the options, down the bottom right here we have dry wet. So I already explained what this does with the reverb. It's exactly the same for delay and every other audio effect. Is how much of the original sound you're going to hear. So if we set to 0, we're just hearing this original kick and snare. I'll set this to 100. We're not hearing the original, we're just hearing the processed version that's been through this delay. I'll set this to 50. Now we get a bit of both. So this will be again the main one that you use, dry wet. Now I'm going to jump over this to the left here, to the feedback. What the feedback is going to do is, you can think of it as how long is it going to be looped for, or how long is it going to repeat for. So if I have this back, if I have this almost at 100, so 95, this sound will honestly keep going until, who knows. So I've stopped it there. It's not playing anymore, as you can see up here. Completely stopped it, but the delay is still going. And this will just keep going and going and going. So you never want to have your feedback up that high because that's going to bleed out into the rest of your track. The same thing if I bring it right down. Set to something like 8%. You're pretty much only hearing the first repetition or the first delay, and then it's stopping or fading out. So it fades out quite fast. Now we'll move up here. So you can see we've got left and right. So at the moment, this little yellow icon is on. That means they're synced together. So left and right are going to delay at exactly the same time. As you might be aware, there's a left and a right channel when it comes to music and sound. And we can alter those left and right channels separately. So if you're wearing headphones, you can alter the left ear to hear something different to the right ear. So if this yellow icon is on, that means left and right are working together. Now, what are all these numbers here? So these numbers here indicate what the delay is going to be in 16th notes. So if I have it set to 4, it's going to be 4/16, which if we divide it down, getting into a bit of maths now. So 4 goes into 16 4 times. So it's essentially a quarter note. And you can hear that when I've set it to 4. Open this. It's playing as if it was quarter notes. So if I get rid of this delay altogether, let me just make another clip down here, and I actually draw in this pattern. So that's what the delay was doing essentially. And you can see I've drawn it on the quarter notes here. So there's the quarters, and that's what the pattern was doing. If I go back to this first one and turn this delay back on, you can hear it's basically the same thing. So what this is what the delay is going to be in 16th notes. So if I set this to 1, that's now 1/16. So it's going to be quite quick. Turn this feedback up a little bit. So now the delay is in 16th notes. If I set it to 8, 8 goes into 16 twice. So it's half notes. So it's going to be like exactly how we've drawn it here, which is half notes. And if I set it to 16, it's going to be 16/16, which goes into it once, which is a whole bar. So it's going to repeat every bar. So I hope that's clear when you're using delay in how I explained it. Once you get used to knowing time signature and tempo, it'll make a lot more sense as well. Now with the mode up here, repitch will be fine for most of your delays. You can mess around with the other two, they're just different modes. Kind of like different warp modes, how some might work better in different scenarios, but for more often than not, repitch will be fine. If we move along down here, you'll see ping pong. This is a different effect altogether. So what this is going to do is bounce the sound. Instead of bouncing left and right, it's going to bounce them from left to right. And you'll hear it, especially if you're on headphones or if you've got speakers, you'll hear the sound bouncing between the speakers. I'll set this to that. Yeah, you can hear a lot better now. So that can be a cool effect as well that you can use. These values here will slightly change the speed of the delay. So even if I set this to 4, so back to quarter notes, I can make them slightly quicker by bringing down this percentage. Almost sounds like a triplet now. And you can mess with them independently as well. Get some extra sauce. Now if I turn off sync, we're not working in 16ths anymore, we're just working by time. So at the moment it's set to 375 milliseconds, so that's what the delay time is. If I pull this down, you can get really fine tuning with this. And I'll push the feedback up. You can hear it 2.8 milliseconds. It's so fast that it almost sounds like a one sound. Just set this feedback down. So yeah, you can delay in time as well, and you can turn this off and actually delay them independently. So you can get some really crazy and cool sounds just with delay. Alright, so I'm not going to go into this today. Just keep in mind the dry wet, feedback, and the time is going to be what you'll use the most as you're getting to using delay. Next one we'll take a look at is the auto pan. So what the pan does is, we talked about left and right before, how you have two different channels. So you can have something set to the left channel and something set to the right channel. We'll come back to these tracks here just to show you that. Let me just play a little piano loop. Okay, I've got this amazing little melody here. Now at the moment, if we look at this track here, now at the moment, these are both set to the center. So it's going to more or less play on both left and right equally. We can pan tracks to left or right by using these little knobs here. So if I push this all the way to the left, push this all the way to the right, now we have the drums on our left ear and the piano on our right ear. And I'll play this. So hopefully you can hear that if you're listening through a stereo source, which 90% of you should be, unless for some reason you're listening on a mono speaker, like a phone or something. You can also see that only the left is lit up here when it plays the sound, only the left channel, and only the right on this one. As I move these back, now they're both on the left. Now let's push the drums back to the right. Now I've got the drums on the right and the piano on the left. I'm just going to double click these, put them back to center. And yeah, that's the pan knob there. So this will pan tracks left and right. Coming back to this drum kit and what the auto pan is, this allows us to do a little bit of modulation and I guess a pattern onto the actual pan itself. So it's not doing much now, because this amount is still set to 0. As I push this amount up, let's just hear the drum kit for now. You can hear it swing between the left and right ear. At the moment it's set to 1 Hertz. If you want to actually time this properly, we can synchronize it to the tempo by hitting this button here. And now we've got our tempo. So at the moment it was 1/16. Actually, let's do this on the piano because it's going to be much more obvious. So we had it 16ths. You can hear it bouncing quite a bit. So here at quarter notes, every quarter note it's bouncing back and forwards left and right. So if we set it to 1, which is 1 bar now, it's taking a bar for it to bounce from left to right, back to left. You can hear that on your headphones as well. So you can change the phase over here. So if you have it at 180, it's going to bounce between left and right. If you change the phase and set it to either 360 or 0, you can see as that line moves, now the left and right are on top of each other. So it's not actually going to sound like it's bouncing between left and right. The volume is actually going to cut in and out. So you can hear it on both left and right equally now, but it's just the volume changing because we've changed that phase. As I bring it back, now it's bouncing between left and right. So the shape here just lets us change the fine tuning of how that sound is bouncing left and right. If we push this up, it's not going to be as smooth. It's going to stay on the left and right quite a lot longer, as you can hear. whereas there it's naturally flowing between left and right. You can also change the waveforms here, and then you can offset the entire pan. So if you didn't like where it was starting, you can just offset that. If you want it to start on the right ear instead, or the right channel. And yeah, this is another fun one to play around with, and you can get a lot out of your sounds as well just by using a pan. Especially if you change the phase and make it so it's changing the volume instead of bouncing left to right. You can do a combination of both. But yeah, I'll leave it at those three effects for now. So that was the auto pan, reverb, and delay. Just keep those in mind and what they do. And what we're going to take a look at now is automation.